Hi, DaVinci. Here we are for part 2 of our discussion about the mechanisms of evolution. We're going to talk about speciation today, which is the biological process of forming a brand new species. Let's get some vocab down. A species is a group of organisms that can mate with one another and have fertile offspring. Fertile meaning that they can have offspring of their own. So here we've got a donkey and a horse, which can make something called a mule. Even though a donkey and a horse are not the same animal, they can produce another offspring that in itself can have another offspring. And that, as I guess we talked about gene flow, as groups intermingle and start to share their genetics, the changes in the traits start building up to where they might become a whole new species of their own. Okay, so step 1 in creating a new species has to be isolation. So once you've got a unique set of genes, you as a population of organisms, you must be separated. So that can happen in 3 different ways. It can happen behaviorally, geographically, or temporally. And we're going to talk about what those mean in a little bit. And if the environments are different, the species will evolve into 2 different species. For instance, behavioral isolation. You can become isolated in the same area even if you can commingle, but behavior is different enough that prevents you from mating. So for instance, you can reproduce together, but you don't because you have different courtship rituals or you have other different reproductive strategies that don't allow you to mate. For instance, these 2 different kinds of meadowlark, the eastern and the western meadowlark, overlap in their range, but they never mate because they have different songs, so they don't recognize each other. You can have geographical isolation, in which populations are separated by some sort of barrier, a big river, mountains, or bodies of water that physically prevents them from being together. Here you can see 2 different types of squirrels that, as the Grand Canyon formed, got separated and eventually were different enough to become a new species. Temporal refers to time isolation. So here are 2 different kinds of orchids, and they live in a rainforest, and they each release pollen that could potentially pollinate each other, but they release the pollen at different times, only on a single day, and so they can't ever pollinate each other because they're not prepared for that pollen. Step 2, once you've got the isolation, you must adapt to whatever environment you're in. So, adaptation involves changes in the gene pool, genetic differences that build up in a separate population. Natural selection is what's happening here. So, if 2 parts of the same group get separated, but they adapt to new conditions, even though the original group might have had the same variety, when they had new environments, the natural selection led them to evolve differently. You can have reproductive isolation as well. Whereas 2 species are no longer to interbreed, this is step 3. When they can no longer interbreed, then you have formed a new species. So they have to become different enough to not be able to reproduce anymore together. So here we have the Abert squirrel from the South Rim and the Kaibab squirrel from the North Rim. They were originally from the same population, but over many, many, many years and separation by the Grand Canyon, they have now become a separate species. That's it. Just a little more vocabulary for you. Hope you have a good night. Bye.